Hello, and welcome to Nomadic Diaries, the re-entry series. I'm Doreen Cumberford, the host.
And I'm Linda Mueller, the co-host.
Hello, and welcome. This is Nomadic Diaries. My name is Doreen Cumberford, and today I am going to give you a short reading from my own book, Life in the Camel Lane, Embrace the Adventure. Now, I have selected this reading because it tells the story of what it was like to be facing repatriation after living in Saudi Arabia for 15 years. This is about re-entry. There are two great works for heroes and heroines to perform. The first is to withdraw from everyday life. The second work is to return to everyday life, carrying the knowledge we have gained in the depths and putting it to use to redeem time and society. This is a quotation by Jean Houston. Chapter 13, Coming or Going. Today, there is a leaving Saudi Arabia sign near the causeway to Bahrain, and getting your picture taken at the sign is a farewell ritual. The majority of us arrived with the fullest intention to return home. In the 15 years I lived in Saudi, I don't recall meeting more than 20 people who had no intention of ever returning home and were destined to remain global nomads. When signing on with Aramco, we went with the intention of building financial security, enjoying an adventure, and recycling ourselves back to home. I guess perhaps 90% or more of us achieved that vision. However, even the idea of home transformed along the way. As Aramcons, mostly we lived a fixed and settled existence in a mini American compound, chasing a grand dream called retirement, which I fondly prefer to call rewirement. We poured our most precious of commodities, time and energy, into awaiting that magical moment. While a few counted down the days until they were released from such purgatory and their real life could commence for the most part, we grabbed the opportunity for travel and adventure. From the moment we left our former home in California for what was to turn into 18 years plus overseas, I was aware that there would be a time when I would return like a salmon to familiar waters. Whether that would be to a physical or emotional place, I never gave it much thought. Leaving a place looks like it is simply a one-day process. You buy a ticket, put yourself on that plane, and voila, you arrive. Not even close. The reality is very different and more complex, especially when abandoning a foreign life where you have lived and loved through many seasons. Preparing to leave involves both the insidiously hidden and blatantly obvious parts of a process that is an evolution rather than an event. We frequently consider a move to be a simple transaction involving relocating ourselves, our physical bodies, while discounting the logistical, spiritual, and emotional parts of the process. It's easy to disregard the energy and time required to process the massive amounts of hidden changes that are happening. As humans, we are oriented and find ourselves in a physical body, and it's our nature to pay attention to those first. Exit only. The exit-only process to depart Aramco is lengthy and complex and requires much paperwork and many surprising activities. Leaving actually started the very first day we arrived in Kingdom. Because we were living a rather institutionalized life and were about to be untethered from the mothership, there were layers upon layers of bureaucracy. The logistical and administrative side of departure for many involved a 6-month process of paperwork with probably 40 to 60 different activities. There were forms to complete John's employment with Aramco. Company housing required that we have the house and the garden inspected. All cars, boats, and other vehicles owned while in Kingdom had to be sold and the documentation presented. There were many urban myths of people stuck in kingdom while the mammoth bureaucracy held up their exit-only visa stamp, that one and final goal in the passport, due to a car or a truck from years back not being properly transferred. Forms a mile deep were required to complete your health experience at the Aram Clinic. I received physical CDs with all my health files, x-rays, and CAT scans. By the time I required them and looked closely, which was more than a year later, I discovered many of them were blank. My entire health history for 15 years just disappeared. Fortunately for me, I seem to be healthy. However, this could have been disastrous for a person with a tricky history of health issues. Management of a benefits package was required. Aramco was generous, and HR had systems to ensure each person left well informed of their options. There was a conference to review benefits and the way forward as newly minted annuitants, the term for retirees. This was not a re-entry coaching or preparation session, but more like a high-level snapshot of life in that moment. Although we attended the conference while brimming over with emotions and excitement, this was purely a corporate experience, and feelings were barely even mentioned. This was certainly neither the place nor the time to start processing the invisible side of our global adventure. Compared to many global assignments, the Aramco culture invites longevity. Many friends had lived there for more than 30 years, embracing a lifetime of experiences. Their children were born in kingdom, raised in the kingdom, then attended boarding schools, and in some cases returned to the kingdom to work. Several families carried on the dynastic tradition through 3 or more generations. Generational and intercultural living became institutionalized and a clearly well-defined lifestyle. The natural re-entry coaching for this group consists of people sitting around and verbalizing their dreams. Groups of us chattering about our dream houses, nest eggs, future hunting, fishing, and skiing expeditions. We would dream of places we would visit and the terrific life our kids would have. In hindsight, I came to understand how supportive your tribe overseas really is. They were like an echo chamber, feeding our dreams back to us. I understand now what a terrific resource they were in offering ordinary ways that kept our visions intact. We were doing this for each other all along the way without ever knowing it. The Aramco exit interview is essentially a mini logistical debrief. Questions like, where are you bound? What is your plan? What are your aspirations for the future, etc., etc. For me, it was very cursory and a dissatisfying experience. But what did I expect? While it invited me, the dependent one, into the process in a way I had not felt invited since the original interview process 18 years prior, it left me with a sinking feeling. Exactly what would I pack up and carry with me that would fully describe the last 18 years? Freedom, I thought. What exactly will that mean? It was never our intention to remain in Arabia for 15 years. Like most, we had arrived with a 5-year goal on our horizon, but we enjoyed it so much we stayed for 15. Immigration to Arabia is the furthest thing from most international minds. Although if you are prepared to convert to Islam or are married to a Saudi national, there are definitely pathways available. Aramco had been an all-encompassing source of well-being for us for almost 2 decades. This would be our 5th and last move with Aramco. While there was a sense of joy and looking forward mixed with the dough of creativity at work in my soul, there was also a sense of dreading the cutting of the umbilical cord. The institution had provided our housing, security, finances, and even our society. In the future, we would not have access to Mother Aramco, as many expats were fond of calling the company. No 939, the community services number that we could call at the drop of a hat to have something fixed at no charge. What a privilege we had enjoyed. Vaguely disquieting comments would land on the subject of the return to normality. It would be an adjustment, they said. It might take years to settle, they said. It might involve some grief, they said. There would be a honeymoon period followed by peaks and valleys, they said. Eventually we would settle, they said. Our lives would never be the same again, they said. We were prepared to create a new adventure. I had some ideas before I left about what that might look like. We understood that we needed a plan and a place to live, and then picking up that red thread of our lives would happen naturally, right? We had friends who were former Aramcons in the town we were moving to. In fact, our next-door neighbors from the first blush experiences in Arabia were in the same town. We had become connected through our dogs. Our very nosy dog had sought to meet their very protective Ava, and 20 years later, we had the privilege of pet sitting for them back home. Our daughter was off to start her university life on the West Coast. We had a beautiful, even magical piece of property and a dream home further north on the same coast, together with vibrant health. What could possibly go wrong? Mentally, we were somewhat prepared, and yet the intellectual process of knowing something and living through it are so different that we might as well not have known any of it. While we lived to tell the tale, little did we know in the preparation to launch stages how circuitous the path was going to be, nor where it would ultimately take us. I studied all the multicultural and re-entry issues books, including Craig Storty's The Art of Coming Home and Third Culture Kids by Ruth Van Reken, David and Michael Pollock. I considered the re-entry from the perspective of our nuclear and extended family and sought to prepare myself in the context of a mother, daughter, wife, and a trailing spouse, which by that time had become my biggest identifier. I thought I was prepared, read the books, studied the literature, stayed in touch with friends who had gone before, paid very close attention to my emotions. I was determined to get it right. If this were an exam, I was about to score an A+. Transitions. On May the 21st, 2008, King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz Al Saud came to the compound to participate in the celebration of Saudi Aramco's 75th anniversary. The 84-year-old king arrived by bus on Inshallah time. Through crowds of cheering people from all around the globe, together with a phalanx of Saudis, he walked, waved, chatted, and blew kisses the entire time. Surely this king was beloved throughout the kingdom, unlike some of his predecessors. From gardeners to science PhD graduates, technology gurus, and children from the Daharan schools, it seemed like the entire world stopped to pay homage to a relationship. Security, obviously, was very tight. Dozens of uniformed members of the Saudi Arabian National Guard walked casually with the king and his retinue. A large portion of the community had been feverishly preparing and rehearsing for this moment for several weeks. Friends had been practicing Saudi sword dancing in order to reenact a scene from 1947 when the original king of Saudi Arabia, King Abdul Aziz ibn Abdul Rahman ibn Fazil ibn Turki ibn Abdullah ibn Muhammad Al Saud, visited the compound and met local children and employees. Several of those very children, now elderly, were honored guests of the king, having returned to the kingdom in 2008 to reenact that moment. They had flown halfway around the globe to revisit memories and their connection with the country. For most, it was a lifetime honor and highlight. Even the king treated it as such. Friends and colleagues participated in a stage production wearing vintage dresses and hats they'd bought. The transformation to the 1940s was incredible. Children and adults, expats and Saudis, including King Abdullah, danced and celebrated together. Children who called the compound home in 2008 sat on a carpeted stage in front of a huge mural printed with pictures of the children who had attended the 1947 event. A collective sense of well-being was created between the corporation and employees, and more importantly, the event created a cultural bridge. The baseball field had been converted to an open park with enormous billboards of photographs from that auspicious day in 1947. The elders walked past those billboards on their way to the staging area, marveling at the beautiful memories they evoked. A visceral sense of rejoicing was felt throughout the camp. All the participants were thrilled at being in the midst of a royal Saudi celebration, an over-the-top extravaganza. What was at the heart of this gathering was a celebration of creativity, courage, and innovation built over 4 generations. Tens of thousands of people from all walks of life in partnership had built this grand intercultural experiment called Aramco, which in turn ultimately supplied much of the fuel to support countries around the world in becoming more developed and prosperous. This behemoth had transformed itself from a tiny desert oil production company to a world-class energy and petrochemical corporation. Each person, man, woman, child, and employee, was being acknowledged for the small place they played in this global machine. Dislocation. But where was I while all these celebrations were in full swing? Well, I was at home sitting in front of a screen creating a long, boring inventory list of our furniture, household goods, and possessions. Yes, I missed the single largest cultural party in the kingdom during our tenure, one that would probably not be reenacted for another 25 years, if ever. Rather than living in the moment, enjoying this momentous gathering, I was back to playing the liminal living game, preparing to leave, yet hoping to stay. This exact situation is where so many of us in the global mobility lane live, and throughout the international corporate world, we frequently land there. This was the beginning of our re-entry. Backtracking slightly, in 2005, we had purchased a home in Bellingham, Washington, in the beautiful Pacific Northwest of the U.S. Retirement was imminent in 2006, but John had been the beneficiary of 2 one-year extensions at the time of the King's visit in 2008. So we had one foot in 2 countries. The official retirement age for anyone at Aramco was 60, and to extend beyond 60 required the approval of Aramco's president. The King's visit coincided with a major shift for me. Discomfort, confusion, a sense of dislocation from my life culminated during this time. We had hoped to remain for 2 more years so Lindsay could complete high school at the same boarding school, and so we could enjoy a few more adventures on our list. Would we remain in kingdom within our sweet nest of intercultural bubbles? Those bubbles had become a stabilizing force through some very challenging times. Ultimately, we lived with this mystery from 2006 to 2010. So the days surrounding the King's visit are a haze. I remember irrational mood swings and fuzzy thinking. Spreadsheets with values attached to personal belongings ruled the day. I felt like my possessions owned me rather than the opposite. Decisions and lists of what to keep, what to leave behind, what to sell, and what to donate ran around our heads. I was bored and agitated by the process and the need to balance 2 possible realities. The only parts I could control were my thoughts, attitudes, and preferences. In between wondering if and when we would depart was concern about the logistical details. Flights would have to be booked. Where would we spend the summer? Our Bellingham house was rented until September. What activities did Lindsay have planned? How could we support her? Where would we have to move her? Would we consider pulling her out of school? And just how would we make all these decisions in a few short weeks? We were living deeply in the land of confusion. Phew! Here we go again. 11 days later, on June the 1st, John reported that he was transferring to another project, temporarily relieving much of the stress. Yet another chapter in his Aramco career was starting. Deep breath, a cascade of relief. I felt a mountain of stress evaporating. I also had some major awakenings. Truly, there was going to be a final exit from this Camel Lane. Exactly how would I make those days count from now on? Henry David Thoreau wrote, "I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life." It was time to get down to business, think through some priorities and values, and re-envision how we would like to complete our time in the kingdom. What else did we hope to accomplish? I needed to become a sponge of the tolerance, graciousness, and hospitality of the Saudi people. Weeks of foggy thinking, confusion, and vacillation between anxiety and boredom ultimately fell away in the course of the next few months. I started to deploy some serious daydreaming about what else I wanted out of our Middle Eastern magic carpet affair and how to finish it well. I shifted. We moved houses. We threw away excess junk, streamlined our household. Being in action was freeing. I met women in different orbits, compounds, and interest groups. Several professional friends had resigned from full-time jobs, and we spent more time together. Although John was traveling the world examining think tanks for CAPSARC, a new venture intended to help with the country's energy strategies, somehow we managed to create a new rhythm that carried us throughout those remaining 24 months in Kingdom. Filling my time with Tai Chi and art classes while editing the Daharan School's yearbook, together with traveling back and forth to the US where Lindsay was in school, kept me fully engaged and very happy. Years later, those weeks of turmoil, uncertainty, and dislocation were ultimately to become fodder for a re-entry curriculum. What is the point of adventure if we don't actually grow into or become a substantial person? Those final 2 years started to reveal just how magical, mysterious, and mystical our stay in Arabia had been. I felt like I was standing under a shower of gratitude.